We begin today on Daf Tes Amud Aleph, the second perek of Masechta Nazir. Sagt the Heilige Mishnah, Hareini Nazir min hagroigeris umin adveila. Person takes a neder for Naziris and he says, I'll be a Nazir from groigeris, dry figs, min adveila, from figs. Pressed figs, yeah. So, what does this mean? Naziris has nothing to do with figs. Beishamai Yomrim Nazir. Beishamai says, even with this kind of expression, he still will be a Nazir. And the Gemara will explain why. Basil will say he's not a Nazir. He said figs, dried figs. What does that have to do with Naziris? Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda says, even when Beishamai says that this is a neder that takes effect, like carbon. When the person, he said, Hareini Nazim and Agreigeris, but then he added that these Greigeris should be asa to me like a carbon. So when he adds that terminology that it should be asa to me like a carbon, so then what happens? These figs become asa to him like a regular neder. So it's not Naziris. Beishamai wasn't saying that he would become a Nazir with this kind of expression. Rather, he would just be asa to them like this is a neder. That's all. But everybody agrees that there's no Naziris here.
But it says Nazir.
Where does it say Nazir? The person said Nazir? What? So Rabbi Yehuda argues. Rabbi Yehuda says he will not be a Nazir. Rabbi Yehuda says that it'll only be a neder, and only if he says that ain't a lie, carbon. So the Gemara, starting with Beishamai's opinion here, so the Mishnah said that any Nazir and Agreigeris and Adveila, Beishamai Yomrim. So the first opinion of the Mishnah was that according to Beishamai Nazir, that he becomes a Nazir by saying this. Why would he become a Nazir? What's a Nazir? The Torah says, Nazir asks a person to drink anything that comes from the grapes, from wine. And he's saying from figs, so he's clearly not accepting upon himself Naziros. Omer Achmana, that goes together. That's what the Torah says. Answers the Gemara, Beishamai Savrila Kerab Meir. Beishamai, their opinion here is based on what Rab Meir says in another place. The Omar, Rab Meir says, Ein Adamitzi Dvarav Levatala. When a person says something, and the way he phrased what he said was like incorrect, but nevertheless, we understand that the person did have some kind of an intention with what he was saying. He wasn't just saying words that were meaningless. So therefore, we say that he did mean to become a Nazir. Even though he used the incorrect phrase, he said he's going to become a Nazir through Greigeris, not eating figs, but nevertheless he did use the term Naziris. And therefore, even though it seems like that what he said is pointless, but Rab Meir says when a person says something, Ein Adam Meitzi Dvarav Levatala. Now the source where Rab Meir says this is regarding the halacha of erechin. Idea of erech is that every person, according to his age bracket, has a certain set value, that if a person says erki olai, that he has to donate a hektish, that value. For a zachar, for a nekeva, like I said, based on the age bracket as well. Okay, but what happens if a person uses that terminology of erech regarding a vessel? He says the erech of this vessel should be dedicated to the Beis HaMikdash. This idea of erech only applies to human beings, and only a human being that's at least 30 months old. 30 days old, yeah, sorry. So the question is, if he uses this expression of erech regarding a keli, so what he said was meaningless. It's not a correct way of saying that you're going to be. If you want to say the domim, the value of this keli, okay, that means something. But the erech, the term erech, is unique for a human being. Rab Meir says, even when you use such an expression, we interpret that he meant to say the value of the keli. So it's not levatala. So similar, the Gemara is applying it here. When the person says, I'll be a Nazir from not eating figs, we apply his words to mean that he wants to be a Nazir, even though he said figs instead of grapes and wine. Now, Beis Hillel Savri. Well, it's Beis Hillel's opinion. Savri law, Beis Hillel holds Rabbi Yosi. Beis Hillel's opinion is based on what Rabbi Yosi says in a different place. The Omar, Rabbi Yosi said, Begemar devarav adam nitfas. In the conclusion of what a person says, that's how we define what the person meant to say. Which means when a person says different things in a statement, and it's not clear what he meant, he starts off with one thing, and he finishes off with something else. The source of this halacha of Rabbi Yosi is regarding the halacha of Tmura. He says first a Tmura of a Oila, then he says it'll be a Tmura of a Shlamim, which is when you're exchanging the Kedusha of the Hektish from one animal to another. So over there, Rabbi Yosi says we go by what the person concluded with. So similar over here, Beis Hillel says, even though the person began and said that any Nazir, but then afterwards he said, so therefore we look at what he said at the end, and Greigeris and Dveila shows that he's not a Nazir at all, so his words end up being meaningless. No, because to asi yourself with a neder from Gregoris and the Devela, you have to use a lashon neder. Naziris is not a kind of a lashon that a person ever uses to aser himself from this kind of a neder. So therefore, it doesn't. Yeah, but since it's not the regular lashon though, so therefore we can't connect it to. He starts off saying Nazir, which is not a neder, and then he says Gregoris and Levela, which means yes a neder, but it doesn't connect b'chlal. So we look at the end and we say that we have nothing here. Okay, Tosfos over here actually explains another detail in the Gemara. The Gemara brings in Rabbi Yossi over here. The Gemara did not l'chayra have to bring in Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara could have brought in, the Gemara is quoting before the opinion of Rab Meir. Rab Meir says, Eina de moitzi dvarav lebatala. Right? The Rabbanon there argue with Rab Meir. The Rabbanon there say that a person will be moitzi dvarav lebatala. Sometimes a person says something and he's just speaking and his words are meaningless. Why would the Gemara not use that opinion to explain what Beis Hillel hold? So Tosfos says the Gemara wants to explain that Beis Hillel hold like Rabbi Yossi because it doesn't want to say that Rab Meir should be dafke according to Beis Shammai, because we always usually paskin like Rab Meir. So it wants that it doesn't want that Beis Hillel should not be able to fit with Rab Meir. So therefore brings in Rabbi Yossi over here. That's what Tosfos explains. Okay, but the Gemara here does not really accept this hezber, at least not at this point. The Gemara says, "Frag the Gemara, but v'hai neder upischai imayhu." But over here, okay, sorry, so 1 second. The Gemara, this is first. This is not a question yet. This is the explanation of Beis Hillel's opinion. Then the Gemara is going to use this to ask it on Beis Shammai. But first, explanation of Beis Hillel. So what did Beis Hillel say? B'gemar devarav adam nitfas. That what a person says in the conclusion of a statement, that's how we interpret of what he said, and therefore v'hai neder upischai imay. Here, he starts off saying Nazir, but immediately he says something else, so that's the Pesach, that's the opening to his neder, meaning that he shows that he's not interested in being a Nazir at all. So therefore, it's not a Nazirus. Now, the Gemara uses the same thing and asks this on Beis Shammai. Frek the Gemara, Beis Shammai, and even according to Beis Shammai, Nami, why don't we say the same thing? Neder, or Pischa that you have over here a neder. He starts off saying he wants to be a Nazir, but right afterwards he says Gregoris and Dvela, and therefore that's a Pesach. He's showing he does not want to be a Nazir. We should say the same thing according to Beis Shammai. So the Mefarshim, the Rishonim, the Tosfos, the Rashi explain what the Gemara is asking is, even though we just explained that Beis Shammai holds like Rab Meir, and Rab Meir says, that when a person says something, even if it's an incorrect statement, but nevertheless, there's something to what he meant, and therefore we accept his words and we interpret it that he wanted to be a Nazir. So Tosfos says, it's not the same thing here to the source of where Rab Meir said it. Rab Meir said it, like I mentioned before, in a case where you're talking about a keli, and he uses a term erech, which is usually applied to a human being, and he uses it regarding a keli. So there, we explained that he meant to say the value of the keli. He just used the wrong terminology. But over here, it's not just a matter of using the wrong terminology. He's saying Greigeris and Dvela, figs, pressed figs, dried figs, that have nothing to do with the inyan of Naziris. It's a contradiction to the Naziris. Naziris is grapes, and he's saying dried figs. So that itself shows that a Befedish does not want to be a Nazir. So how can we apply the opinion of Rab Meir over here to this? So the Gemara therefore gives another pshat. Elo, Beis Shammai Savri law, rather, Beis Shammai holds Rab Meir. Yes, Take, he holds like Rab Meir, that said, the Omar, Eina de Moitzi Dvarav Levatala, that a person does not speak words for no reason. And now, but we have to add over here as follows. The moment he says the words Hareini Nazir, so Havalei Nazir. Just by saying those two words, he becomes a Nazir. That's how we understand his words. Because we know that a person does not speak for nothing, so when he said those first two words, he meant what he said, and he wants to be a Nazir. But then, and then afterwards, when the person adds and says that he doesn't want to eat figs, dried figs, pressed figs, so what is he really doing now? Now he's sort of retracting of what he just said, and he wants to be shayl, he wants to request a heter for this, that he's going to be a Nazir. So now the question is, when he says, could he request a heter for this Naziris that he just accepted upon himself? So now Beis Shammai that says that he will remain a Nazir is because Beis Shammai follow their reasoning. The Amri, Beis Shammai said, and we learned this in the Danim as well, Ein she'ela behektish, that when it comes to hektish, once you're maktish a behem before a carbon, you cannot be shayil, you cannot be mater and get rid of this hektish. And therefore they say similar applies over here. V'kivin the ein she'ela behektish, since there's no requesting a heter for hektish, ein she'ela benazirus. There's also no heter for Nazirus. Nazirus is a similar thing to hektish. Here you see in this Gemara that Nazirus is a similar kind of thing of hektish, that there's a certain kedusha that takes effect. And just like by hektish, you cannot request a heter. Once you accept it upon yourself the Nazirus, you can't request a heter anymore. Beis Hillel Savri, and what's Beis Hillel's opinion? Why do Beis Hillel disagree with this? Rab Shimon. The reason is because Beis Hillel holds like Rab Shimon. The Tanan, we learned in a different place, Rab Shimon paiter. Rab Shimon will pater. Shaleis nadiv kederech hamisnadvim, because he's not donating a carbon the way a person should be donating a carbon. What was Rab Shimon talking about? The Gemara here is going to quote Barichis, the source of what Rab Shimon was speaking about. It's coming soon in the Gemara. Rab Shimon is speaking about a person that says, I want to bring a carbon mincha from sa'irim, from barley. Carbon mincha cannot be brought from barley. Not at least a carbon mincha that a person donates. So Rab Shimon says, because you said such a term, that you want to bring it from barley, so then your words are meaningless. Right? So the same thing over here, when the person says, I want to be a Nazir, and what's going to be my Naziris from Greigeris and Devela, such a kind of a Naziris is worthless. That's the basis of the opinion of Beis Hillel. Again, Taisus over here explains, why doesn't the Gemara explain the opinion of Beis Hillel much simpler? If we're saying that the basis of Beis Shammai is that a person said he's going to be a Nazir, and then afterwards he says, Min agregeris and advela, he's trying to uproot his Naziris. He wants to request a heter for his Naziris. And Beis Shammai says, you can't. So why can't we say that according to Beis Hillel, yesh eila behektish, a person could uproot a neder for hektish, and a person could uproot his Naziris. And therefore, when he says, Min agregeris and advela, it uproots his Naziris. So Taisus explains, if that would be the case, it would uproot his Nazirus, but then at least the neder should take effect. He's saying, Min agregeris min advela. He should become also from Greigeris and Dvela. Right? So therefore, the Gemara brings this opinion of Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon says, when you use a lashon that's not appropriate, that doesn't fit for what you're saying, so then it doesn't take effect. So therefore over here, according to Beis Hillel, he's not going to be a Nazir, because he said Greigeris and Dvela. What does figs have to do with Naziris? On the other hand, it's not going to be a neder either, because using a lashon Nazirus is not a lashon that's used for a neder. Usually by a neder you say carbon or kainim or isser, but not Nazirus. So therefore it's not going to be anything. Okay, the Gemara here will bring another few different interpretations of this machlekes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, different than what it said in the Mishnah. Talk to Gemara Mastis and the like Tane. The way our Mishnah brings the argument of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is not like the following Tana in the Braisa. The Tanya in the Braisa we learned Rab Nosson said Beis Shammai Oimrim, Beis Shammai say Nodur v'Nazir. That when a person uses this terminology that I'm going to be a Nazir from Greigeris and Dvela, it could either be a neder or it could be Naziris. And the Gemara is going to explain soon when it'll be a neder and when it'll be Naziris. Beis Hillel say Nadur, it could become a neder, but ve'ein Nazir. We can't use this terminology for Naziris. So the Gemara explains, Beis Shammai savri lo k'Rab Meir. Beis Shammai holds like Rab Meir. So if he holds like Rab Meir, the Gemara just explained, according to Rab Meir, if a person uses this lashon that I'm going to be a Nazir, hareini Nazir min agregeris min advela, what does Rab Meir say? Person is not moitzi dvarav luv batala, and therefore he becomes a Nazir. And then when he wants to uproot it, he can't anymore. It's too late. So that's if he says, Areni Nazir min agregeris min advela. Rabbi Yehuda. But then it could also become a neder, and that's like what Rabbi Yehuda said. Rabbi Yehuda said, what's if the person added that this should be for me like a carbon? So he actually did say a lashon that's usually used for a neder. So then it will become a neder. Well, Beis Hillel savri la k'Rabbi Yosi. And Beis Hillel holds like Rabbi Yosi. What does Rabbi Yosi say? That you follow the last lashon that a person said, right? Like that's Rabbi Yosi, the Gemara mentioned before, tfais lashon achrein, which means, according to this interpretation of the Gemara now, that Beis Hillel holds when a person said hareini Nazir, and then he added min agregeris min advela, we don't look at the beginning of what he said, which is Nazir, but we look at the end of what he said. When he said min agregeris min advela, that shows that he wanted to make a neder not to eat figs, and therefore that takes effect. So according to this interpretation in the Gemara over here, Beis Hillel will agree that his words do mean something. It will become a neder even though it will not become a Naziris. The Gemara brings yet another opinion, another version of this machlokes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Lishne achrene amrila. They learned this brayse as follows. Rab Nosson said, Beis Shammai, Yomrim Beis Shammai say, Nador ve'ein Nazir. Even Beis Shammai agrees, this kind of a language, Hareini Nazir min agregaris, it'll only be a neder not to eat these figs, but it won't be any Naziris. Beis Hillel Yomrim, loy Nador ve'loy Nazir. It will not be not a neder and not a Naziris either. So the Gemara explains, Beis Shammai kerab Yehuda. According to what we're saying now, Beis Shammai is only following what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda that was quoted in the Mishnah that says that if he said that Reza like a carbon, so then it'll be a neder, but no Naziris takes effect at all. So because he doesn't hold, not like any of the opinions that we mentioned before, that this could be Naziris, only a neder. And Beis Hillel, Rab Shimon, and Beis Hillel holds like what we brought before from Rab Shimon, that any time you use a lashon that's not the proper way of saying this, then it doesn't take effect. And saying Hareini Nazir min agregaris is not a proper lashon, not for Naziris, because he mentioned figs, and not for a neder either, because he mentioned Nazirus, and therefore nothing takes effect. Okay, now the Gemara will bring here the source from where this opinion of Rab Shimon comes from. Rab Shimon said that if you use a lashon that's not appropriate for that subject, that's not the right terminology for that subject, it doesn't take effect. Where did Rab Shimon say this? Tanan, so we learned this Tanan Hossam. We learned over there, this is a Mishnah Masechta Menachos. A person says, Harei alai mincha lahavi min ha'sa'irim. I take upon myself to donate a mincha from what? From barley. There's no nedava. You can't be bringing a nedava of a mincha from barley. So yavi min achitim. So Tanakama here says you'll have to bring from wheat. Kemach, if he says I'm going to bring a mincha from flour, and there's no kemach, which is regular flour. A mincha is not brought from regular flour. It has to be brought from fine flour. Yavi Sailes, he brings his mincha from the fine flour, which is what the mincha is supposed to be brought from. Shalei b'shemen levaina, he makes a neder to bring a mincha without the oil or the levaina that has to be brought with it. So it doesn't matter. Yiviena b'shemen levaina. So he has to bring it the way it's supposed to be brought, with the oil and the levaina. If he said his mincha is going to be a chatzi yisarin, a half yisarin, so the minimum amount of a mincha is supposed to be a full yisarin, yavi yisarin shalim. He brings a full yisarin. If he says his mincha will be yisarin and mechza and yisarin and a half, yavi shnayim. So there's no 1.5. You have to bring 2 yisraelis. That's a Tanakama. Even though he used the terminology which was incorrect, we fix it and say that he meant to bring a proper mincha. Rab Shimon poiter, but Rab Shimon says because he used the incorrect terminology, so he's potter. His neder doesn't take effect. Shaloi yisnadiv kederech hamisnadvim, because he didn't donate the way a person is supposed to donate. He didn't use the right lashon. Okay, now the Gemara will connect this to our Mishnah. So man Tana, who is the Tana that says the Tana Kama of that Mishnah? Even though he used the incorrect language, he said he's bringing from barley, but nevertheless he's going to have to bring the mincha. The mincha will take effect. His nedava, that is, will take effect, and therefore he's going to have to bring from wheat. So Chizkiya says b'machloikis shnuya. We already have this taught as a machlokes. Or Beis Shammai, and the Tanakama of that Mishnah is Beis Shammai. Why? Because Lav Omri Beis Shammai, didn't Beis Shammai say in our Mishnah a similar thing? That Ki Oma min agregaris min advela. When a person says I'm going to be a Nazir, not to eat pressed figs or dry figs, have a Nazir. He becomes a Nazir, even though he mentioned figs. Hachanami, same thing over there regarding donating a carbon mincha. Ki Oma min asa'ira, when he says he's bringing a mincha and the mincha is going to be from barley, maybe min achitim. He brings his mincha from the proper thing, from the wheat, even though he didn't use that terminology. So what it says there seems to be the opinion of Beis Shammai. But according to Beis Hillel, it wouldn't fit. According to Beis Hillel, if you use the wrong terminology, so then the Naziris here doesn't take effect. And over there as well, like the Gemara before said, Beis Hillel holds like Beis Shammai. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, however, Rabbi Yechanan says, no, it's not the same thing. You can't compare the wrong terminology used in our Mishnah to the wrong terminology being used there by the Mincha. I can tell you that Mishnah there regarding the mincha goes according to all opinions, according to Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Why? Because there's a difference. But Omer, over there, the person says, by the mincha, he says, Ilu yisi yudeya. If I would know, she'ein noidrin kach, that you can't donate a mincha brought from barley, so le'nadarti kach. I didn't intend to bring from barley. I would have donated to bring from wheat, which is what could be brought. In other words, what Rabbi Yochanan is saying is there's a huge difference between the Naziris and the case of Mincha. By Naziris, everybody knows that the Issa of Naziris has nothing to do with figs. The Issa of Naziris is not to drink wine or grapes. So therefore, over here, when the person says figs, so then the person knows that that's not Naziris, and he's saying it anyways, willingly and knowingly. So therefore, this kind of a neder, according to Basil, is not Naziris. But over there by the Mincha, people make that mistake because there is a carbon mincha in the Beis HaMikdash that's brought from barley. The carbon ha'omer, second day of Pesach, is brought from barley, and the carbon of saita, the mincha by a saita, is also brought from barley. Elamai, it can't be donated. So therefore, when the person says this terminology, he made a mistake. He really wanted to bring a proper mincha, he just didn't know. Over there, when he doesn't know, then I say that we're going to tell him that he has to bring the proper mincha, which what he really intended to bring. Correct. So you look at what he really intended to bring. Okay, so that's a different case. Now the Gemara continues and says, Omar Chizkiya explained regarding that opinion there in the Mishnah, that when he says barley, he's going to have to bring a proper mincha. Loi shalun, that's only learned Ela sha'omar min ha'sa'irim. If he said he's going to bring a mincha from barley, so then we say that he has to bring a mincha from wheat. Aval omar min ha'adashin. If a person comes and says, I'm going to bring a carbon mincha from lentils, so then then he doesn't have to bring anything. Why? Because there's no such a thing. A carbon mincha from lentils is no such a thing. That everybody knows that it's a mistake. Barley is something that people could think that it's a carbon omer that's brought in the Beis HaMikdash, so you can donate that. But from lentils, so if he says such a thing, that's worthless. So the Gemara asks, wait a minute, Chizkiya is the one that's saying this. This would fit really with what Rabbi Yochanan just said. The Gemara, Mechti, let's see. Chizkiya kaman Michael masnisen. According to who did Chizkiya just explain the Tanakama of that Mishnah goes according to? Right? When the Tanakama there says that when you say barley, that his words are worthless because he didn't donate the way you're supposed to. So what did he say? It goes to Beishamai. Goes according to Beishamai in our Mishnah that said that you're making Naziris, a neder of Naziris, and you say that the Naziris is from figs, that the Naziris does take effect. So, the Gemara, v'ho'adashim legabe mincha, saying that your carbon mincha is going to be from lentils, is kegreigeres legabe nazir. It's the same idea. It's equivalent to a person accepting upon himself naziris from figs. Domo, it's the same thing. Everybody knows that there's no naziris from figs, and everybody knows that there's no mincha from lentils. And still, the Ka'amri Beishamai have a Nazir. And over here, even though you use a Lashon, everybody knows that this is not Nazirus. Nevertheless, Beishamai still says that because he used the term Nazir, he's not mighty his words Levatala, and it takes effect. So therefore, we should say the same thing over there by the Mincha, that even if he said lentils, that he should be obligated to bring the Mincha. So why is Chizkiya making this distinction? Says the Gemara, Hodebe Chizkiya. Chizkiya retracted from his opinion. And Chizkiya Taka held, like Rabbi Yochanan, that in a case where it's a clear mistake and a person used this terminology and everybody knows that this is wrong, so then the neder, whether it's by the Naziris or over here by the Mincha, does not take effect. So the Gemara now explains, why did he have Charata? V'amai Hodebe. Why did he have Charata? Rave, so Rave says, simple, masnisen kashise, because he had a question on the Mishnah there. Why over there does it say sa'irim? Listening min adashim. If that Mishnah is taka following Beishamai's opinion over here, just like Beishamai here says, that saying a Nazirus and mentioning the figs, that the Nazir still takes effect, so the Mishnah there should have used the same terminology, a similar concept. It should have said, even if you say that you accept upon yourself a mincha of lentils, that still is obligated to bring the mincha. So therefore, how did Chizkiya understand? Why did the Mishnah not say Mina Adashim? Elasava Chizkiya. Chizkiya holds, even according to Beishamai, this is not true. Ki ka'amri Beishamai hasam. When did Beishamai say over here regarding the Naziris in our Mishnah that when a person uses this terminology that he's going to be a Nazir from Greigeris and from the Dveila, Rabbi Yehuda? It's only like Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says Hitaka won't be a Nazir. By Nazir there's no such a thing as Greigeris and Dveila, and everybody knows it, so it cannot take effect. Elamai, over here when he says when a Greigeris and when a Dveila, it'll only take effect as a Neder. Right? Even though he used the term Naziris, which is not the usual terminology that's used for a neder, but nevertheless, that's what Beishamai is saying, that it will take effect because he said Greigeris and Dvela, it'll take effect as a neder. So similar over there regarding the carbon mincha, when the person says that he's going to bring a mincha from Sa'idim, even though that's not something that you could bring as an adava, but the person didn't know, he didn't realize, so therefore it takes effect. But if you're going to say mincha from adashim, from lentils, that everybody knows that it doesn't take effect, and even Beis Shammai would agree that it's meaningless. Sagt the Gemara weiter, but Rabbi Yechanan argued in this, and he said, "Afilim in adashim." By the carbon mincha, a person says he's going to bring a carbon mincha from lentils. It takes effect. He has to bring his carbon mincha, a proper carbon mincha from wheat, from chitim. Like the Gemara, how could Rabbi Yechanan himself say this? For Rabbi Yechanan Huda Amar, as we quoted before, Rabbi Yechanan is the one that said about that Mishnah that Ba'omer ilu yisi yedeya she'ein neidrin kach lo nadarti kach, that the reason why when a person says that I want to bring a mincha from barley, his neder takes effect is because he says, if I would have known that you can't bring a mincha from barley, I wouldn't have made the neder in this way. I would have said it properly that I'm bringing it from wheat. So how could Rabbi Yechanan say that this includes even when a person said that he wants to bring it from lentils? Lentils, everybody knows that it's not for a mincha, and the person said it anyways. So that means that he knowingly said it in the wrong way. So why should this take effect? Why should he be obligated to bring this mincha? So the Gemara says, you're right, Rabbi Yechanan, this is not Rabbi Yechanan's own opinion. Rather, l'dvarav the Chizkiah hu the ka'amar. Rabbi Yechanan was arguing with Chizkiah. He was telling Chizkiah, you have no reason to retract from your opinion. Why? So he tells him as follows. At my time, so as the Gemara just explained, what was the reason why Chizkiah retracted from his opinion? Mishom because it was bothering him. Why? If our Mishnah is Take Beis Shammai, I mean that Mishnah there in Menachos it is. If that Mishnah is Take Beis Shammai, and Beis Shammai holds even if you use a terminology that's wrong, and everybody knows it's wrong, and still it takes effect in Naziris, and over there as well you should say the same thing by the carbon mincha, so why did it not say Minah Dashim? That was the question that was bothering Chizkiah. So Rabbi Yechanan says to Chizkiah, that's not a question. Dilme loimi boya kamar. Actually, you could say that maybe by mentioning minas ha'odim, there is a bigger chiddush in this. What's the bigger chiddush? Loimi boya ki amem adashim. Needless to say, it's not such a big chiddush to say that if a person says, I'm going to bring a mincha from lentils, the maisa mincha mal yiseh, that will be a good neder, and he'll have to bring a proper mincha. And the reason for this is the ikele meimar, because when a person uses this terminology of lentils, so then I could interpret his words and say, meheder hu the hader. He's retracting of the neder that he just said. If you say lentils, which everybody knows cannot be brought for a mincha, so what's really happening? He starts off saying, I want to bring a mincha, and then he says lentils. Obviously, what's really happening here is he's retracting from what the words that he just said. And therefore, utfais lashon rishain. And maybe I would follow the opinion that says that I don't look at the last point the person said in his statement. I look at the first point that the person that he said in his statement. And he started off saying mincha. And if he started off saying mincha, so that's going to be the reason why he's going to be obligated to bring a proper mincha. The word adashim that he said in the end, he's trying to retract, and that's meaningless. That's what the Mishnah would be. That's what the Mishnah would be saying, and that's not such a big chiddush. So the Mishnah says an even bigger chiddush. Ella, rather, the Mishnah comes to say, and the Bachavir adds, even if he says that he wants to bring a mincha from sa'idim. So aim over here, I could say, Vadai the hachi kama. So definitely what this person meant to say is as follows. If it's possible for me to sanctify and dedicate and donate a carbon mincha of barley, similar to the way it is by the oimer or a saita which is brought from barley, tiktosh, then my neder should take effect. But but if I can't bring from barley, I don't want. In other words, the person is under the impression that it's possible that he could donate from barley. And therefore he's making it clear he only wants to bring from barley, not from anything else. You can't say that he's retracting what he said before, not necessarily. He's thinking that maybe he could bring from barley. And therefore he never really meant to dedicate a proper mincha. So maybe in this case he would not have to bring a proper mincha. Kamash Malon, that's why that Mishnah is saying a big chiddush, the maisim and achitim, that even in such a case, he will have to bring a proper mincha from wheat. So therefore, Rabbi Yechanan is telling Chizkiah that you have no reason to retract from your opinion. But nevertheless, as we saw in the Gemara before, Chizkiah did retract from his opinion. So the conclusion of this Gemara is, when a person says, I'm going to bring a mincha from lentils, everybody agrees that such a kind of a neder does not take effect and he doesn't have to bring anything at all.